It was 11:54 p.m. The underground garage beneath the Astrocorp skyscraper was cold. Caleb Rowan, the company driver and a single father, was counting the seconds until he could clock out. Suddenly, Amelia Hartmann, the CEO, stumbled out, profoundly intoxicated after a massive contract win. She swayed, her expensive heels threatening to betray her. Caleb moved forward. She snapped, "I don't need help. From staff." A few seconds later, the CEO's iron mask shattered. She collapsed into tears, whispering, "Just take me home. Please." Caleb had no idea that Amelia's words the following morning would change his entire life. Caleb Rowan's life was a masterclass in quiet endurance. 5 years after the sudden, catastrophic accident that claimed his wife, his days were a tightrope walk between survival and parenthood. His grief was no longer a fresh wound, but a dull, constant ache he carried for Lily. Lily, his 6-year-old, was his world, a whirlwind of bright curiosity and artistic talent. She loved drawing fantastical creatures, and tragically, she was acutely attuned to the subtle shifts in her father's mood. When Caleb came home late, tired, or withdrawn, Lily would instinctively leave a crayon drawing of a smiling sun on his nightstand, her silent way of trying to heal him. He lived for those suns. His work as a personal driver and event coordinator for Astrocorp was a means to an end. It paid the rent, barely, and kept Lily in her small, beloved school. The constant late hours and the expectation of immediate, unquestioning obedience were the price he paid. He often missed bedtime, relying on a trusted neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, to fill the gap. The emotional toll of constantly disappointing Lily, even for survival, was immense. Caleb had learned to live in silence, accepting the professional disrespect as the cost of his daughter's future. Amelia Hartmann, 32, lived on the opposite side of the wealth divide, but was equally imprisoned. As the youngest CEO in Astrocorp's history, she was groomed for ruthless excellence. Her family's legacy was a chain, not a crown. She operated under the crushing weight of expectation, which she met by constructing an impenetrable facade of perfection. She believed that any sign of personal fragility would be exploited by the old guard on the board, who saw her age and gender as inherent weaknesses. Her recent struggles had been brutal. The media was savaging her over a delayed product line. The board was quietly maneuvering to replace her, and her long-term partner had walked out, citing her emotional unavailability. She was profoundly, deeply alone in a 20,000-square-foot glass mansion. Her interactions with Caleb were cold, a purely performative display of authority necessary to maintain her corporate distance. She would critique his car temperature, his arrival time, even the brand of water he stocked, simply to remind both of them of the rigid barrier between staff and executive. Caleb never fought back, a fact Amelia often interpreted as confirmation of his meekness, not his necessity. The night of the massive contract signing party, the success was hollow. The congratulations felt manipulative. The champagne tasted like isolation. When the elevator doors opened in the cold garage, Amelia's carefully constructed world finally imploded. The sound of the wind was amplified by the silence of the empty parking lot. Her high heel snapped, sending a shard of pain through her ankle, mirroring the emotional pain that had been building for months. Caleb's move to support her was purely reflexive, a driver's instinct to prevent an incident. Her sharp, reflexive rejection, "I don't need help," from staff, was the last gasp of her professional self. But then, the sight of the deserted garage and the raw, cold reality of her life overwhelmed her. The tears started hot and fast. Not the controlled crying of an adult, but the full, messy sobs of a deeply wounded young woman. In the car, cocooned from the watching world, the secret spilled out into the dark leather. "Everyone leaves," she wept, her voice distorted by alcohol and pain. "My father, my ex, they all leave when things get difficult. I try so hard. I work until I break, and it's never, ever enough." Caleb drove through the slick streets, the rhythmic swipe of the wipers marking the passing of her confessions. He didn't speak. He simply drove with a smooth, silent expertise that was its own form of compassion. He saw not the formidable CEO, but a frightened girl trapped in a gilded cage. When the car finally stopped at her desolate mansion, Amelia clutched his wrist. The grip was desperate, the raw, honest fear of abandonment palpable. "Don't leave." Caleb gently guided her inside, his movements precise and respectful. He adjusted the duvet, placed the water, and left the house in silence. He took nothing but the memory of her vulnerability. He drove away, agonizing over whether she would obliterate him professionally for having seen her so utterly broken. He was horribly wrong. Amelia remembered every single tear, every desperate word. Caleb couldn't sleep. He spent the few hours before dawn pacing his small kitchen, the weight of his secret crushing him. He meticulously checked his truck, polished every surface, preparing for his inevitable termination. He had already mentally calculated how many rideshare jobs he would need to cover next month's rent. The fear was acute. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the one stable element for Lily. Amelia arrived at the office precisely at 8 a.m., the picture of flawless corporate control. She wore a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. Yet when her gaze swept over the staff, it paused on Caleb for a moment, a flicker of something that was neither disdain nor professionalism. She bypassed her assistants and pressed the intercom. "Caleb, please come to my office. Now." The walk across the marble floor felt like a death march. Caleb stood before her massive desk, the panoramic view of the city mocking his anxiety. He waited, his spine straight, rehearsing his professional alibi. Amelia leaned back in her chair, observing him, not with the typical CEO scrutiny, but with a strange, contemplative intensity. The silence stretched until it was almost deafening. Finally she spoke, her voice measured, stripped of its usual corporate edge. "Caleb, thank you." Her words landed with the soft impact of a falling leaf. "Thank you for your professionalism. More importantly, thank you for treating me like a human last night." Caleb's professional composure dissolved into sheer confusion. This was not the expected guillotine. Amelia continued, her eyes never leaving his. "I remember. Every word, every desperate action." She paused, the effort of the next words visible on her face. "And I owe you something more than just gratitude. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel small. You never deserved that. And I apologize for confusing my professional pressure with my personal fear." The apology hit Caleb harder than any criticism ever could. He felt a burning behind his eyes. He mumbled something about it being part of the job. Amelia waved the formality away. "No, it wasn't. It was about my ego and my inability to see past the hierarchy." She leaned forward. "Tell me about Lily. Truly. Why do you always take the graveyard shifts?" Caleb, unprepared for genuine curiosity, stumbled through the details. The cost of school, his need to be present for Lily immediately after school, the 5 years since his wife's death. For the first time, he spoke about his life to his boss without filtering out the pain. Amelia listened, her expression softening into something akin to empathy, a genuine, unforced interest shining in her eyes. The shift was immediately apparent in her actions. At noon, Amelia committed the most shocking social transgression in AstraCorp's history. She had her assistant call Caleb and formally invite him to sit with her, the CFO, and the head of R&D for the executive lunch in the sealed private dining room. The colleagues were dumbfounded. Caleb sat, feeling acutely out of place, listening to conversations about quarterly futures in merger targets. The whisper mill in the company went into overdrive, fueled by jealousy and suspicion. The CEO is favoring the driver. He's been in that private room for an hour. It has to be a relationship. She's giving him preferential treatment. Something happened in that garage. The corporate backlash was swift, led by Mark Jensen, Caleb's middle manager supervisor and an ambitious, spiteful man. Mark, who had always viewed Caleb as a disposable tool, saw his chance to strike. He tried to undermine Caleb constantly in the following days, subtly assigning him impossible tasks, changing schedules last minute, and loudly complaining about minor infractions, hoping to force Amelia to acknowledge Caleb's unsuitability. One afternoon, Mark cornered Caleb in the logistics bay, criticizing him for not perfectly aligning the tires of the CEO's car. "Rowan, you're an executive driver, not a cabbie. You need to understand the standards here. Or maybe your new executive privileges are distracting you." Caleb was about to swallow the insult, but Amelia appeared silently behind Mark, having observed the exchange from the security camera feed she had just requested access to. Her voice when she spoke was ice cold and utterly devastating. "Mark, you will cease all unprofessional monitoring of your team members immediately. If you need to focus on a tire's alignment, I suggest you take a wrench yourself." She pulled Mark into her office and closed the door. She didn't shout. She delivered a calm, reasoned, corporate dismantling of his authority. "I run this company based on mutual respect. You have zero respect for Caleb Rowan, and therefore, you will have zero role in my executive operations. If you can't respect your team, you can leave the room. And if this pattern continues, you can leave AstraCorp." Caleb witnessed the aftermath, Mark's pale, defeated face. It was the first time in his life he felt truly defended by someone other than his wife. Something fundamental had shifted in Amelia. She was using her power not to protect herself, but to defend the vulnerable. The ultimate moment of connection came unexpectedly. Lily's school called, a pipe had burst, and the children needed immediate pickup. Caleb had no choice but to bring her back to the office until his shift ended. Lily, overwhelmed by the towering lobby and the severe faces, clutched Caleb's hand, hiding behind his leg. Amelia emerged, expecting a meeting, but seeing the small, timid girl, the formal CEO demeanor dissolved completely. She didn't crouch, she fully knelt down, bringing herself onto the cold marble floor, eye level with Lily. "Hi, Lily," she said, her voice unusually soft, practicing the kindness she felt. "Do you like drawing?" Lily, usually shy, nodded slightly. Amelia, without hesitation, handed her a beautiful, expensive leather-bound moleskin notebook. "This is yours, it's for big dreams. Draw anything you dream of." Caleb looked down at the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, kneeling on a cold floor, engaging with his daughter with genuine, gentle care. The gratitude he felt transcended the professional. It was deeply personally affecting. Lily's very first gift to Amelia was a crayon drawing of a smiling woman standing between a father and daughter, a rudimentary image of a nascent family. Amelia, defying all corporate counsel, placed the drawing proudly on her massive mahogany desk, right next to her crucial stock reports. She never referred to it, but every day it was the first thing she saw. The public and internal rumors intensified, fueled by Mark's whispered grievances and the media's appetite for drama. The narrative solidified. CEO Amelia is having an inappropriate relationship with her company driver. The board of directors, a collection of older men obsessed with tradition and appearance, called an emergency meeting. Amelia walked in, composed but ready for war. "This situation is untenable, Amelia," the chairman, Mr. Sterling, stated, without preamble. "The stock has dipped 2 points over these rumors. You cannot maintain this proximity to a lower-level employee. It shows a catastrophic lack of judgment and control." Amelia met his gaze, her voice firm. "It shows humanity, Mr. Sterling, and trust. Respect isn't about rank, it's about character. Caleb Rowan has more character than half the men in this room." Twist 1. A heavily edited, deeply malicious video clip was released to a major financial news site. The clip showed Caleb attempting to support a staggering Amelia in the garage. The footage cut to slow motion to emphasize her lack of control, and then a quick shot of Caleb guiding her into her house. The accompanying article implied he had taken advantage of her impaired state. The media erupted. Headlines screamed, "AstraCorp CEO facing mental instability crisis. Evidence suggests dependence on subordinate." Amelia was blindsided, her image crisis escalating into a corporate disaster. Caleb, devastated by the smear, wanted to issue a public statement, but the legal team shut him down cold. "You are a non-disclosure employee, Mr. Rowan. Any statement will be construed as admission of guilt or coercion." Amelia felt a crushing guilt that her weakness had dragged him into this vortex. The storm was worsened by the sudden, oily reappearance of Adam Hayes, Amelia's ex-fiancé. Adam, a minor hedge fund manager with a taste for drama, arrived at AstraCorp under the guise of concern. He cornered Amelia during a break, his smile slick and predatory. "Look at you, Amelia, completely out of control, just like that other time," he whispered, referencing a tragedy 2 years ago. "She breaks down easily. She needs someone strong like me, someone who can handle the pressure, not some poor widower who's barely holding his life together and only wants your money." Caleb, waiting discreetly nearby, heard the vicious assessment. It was an assault on his dignity, his love for his deceased wife, and his efforts for Lily. His heart twisted with a pain that bordered on physical. Amelia, seeing Caleb's quiet devastation, snapped. All the suppressed rage from years of being judged and abandoned boiled over. She slapped Adam, the sharp crack echoing through the hallway. "You don't decide my worth, Adam. Or Caleb's," she spat, her composure entirely gone, replaced by raw emotion. "You left when I needed you. He stayed when I pushed him away. That tells me everything I need to know." Humiliated and enraged, Adam stormed out, but not before leaking further damaging claims, threatening to sue Amelia for harassment and exploiting her staff for emotional comfort. The company was in complete upheaval. Twist 2. The final, devastating blow came the next day. A vital, highly sensitive technical document related to the new product launch, the one Amelia had been celebrating, vanished. The immediate finger of blame pointed squarely at Caleb. The board argued that because he had access to her car, her private schedule, and the garage on the critical night, he was the easiest target for corporate espionage or blackmail. The implication was clear. He was compromised. HR delivered the notice of suspension. Caleb was escorted back to his small locker to gather his personal items. He saw Mark watching from down the hall, a triumphant smirk curling his lips. He arrived home, his face etched with defeat, to find Lily waiting. Lily cried when she saw her dad packing his work ID and uniform. She knew with that eerie child intuition that something was terribly wrong. Caleb knelt, pulling her close, the scent of her hair familiar and comforting. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy didn't do anything wrong. We'll be okay. This is just a bad patch." But even his voice sounded hollow. Amelia, driving past his street on her way to an emergency meeting, saw the painful scene. Caleb holding his tearful daughter, his future crumbling around him. It was a catalyst. She saw the price of her own power struggle being paid by the people she cared about most. She bypassed her meeting and drove straight to the executive boardroom. She burst in, ignoring the seated, self-satisfied directors. She threw the document outlining Caleb's suspension onto the polished mahogany table. "If you're going to punish someone," she declared, her voice resonating with absolute conviction, "punish me. He did nothing wrong. You are persecuting an innocent man to protect your petty, outdated image." She didn't wait for them to argue. Using her executive authority, she bypassed HR and the external security team, utilizing her own private forensic unit. She had them examine the internal systems and Mark's recent digital activity. Within 4 hours, she had the proof. Mark, who had been secretly planning to jump ship to a rival, had stolen the document, intending to sell it, and then framed Caleb to eliminate a perceived favorite. Mark was arrested and terminated. Amelia left the stun board and drove immediately to Caleb's house. The snow had started to fall heavily, quickly blanketing the small neighborhood. She scrambled out of her car, her expensive suit forgotten. She ran to his door, breathless, her hair soaked with melting snow, her eyes wide and full of fear. Not the fear of corporate failure, but the fear of losing him. "Please," she gasped, leaning against the doorframe, trying to catch her breath. "Don't disappear from my life. I couldn't bear it." Caleb stared at her, the most powerful woman he knew, standing helpless and shivering on his doorstep, having risked everything to save him. He realized his heart had healed enough to trust again. Caleb reached out, not to touch her, but to gently guide her inside, out of the snow. He then slowly, deliberately placed into her hand the latest drawing from Lily, a meticulous crayon sketch of all three of them standing together, a small, fragile family unit, his tacit, nonverbal admission that he wanted to belong to her world too. The next step was simple, but momentous. Amelia joined Caleb and Lily for dinner. A simple evening in Caleb's humble apartment, filled with the aroma of home-cooked pasta and toasted bread. Amelia, who hadn't cooked or cleaned for herself since she was 16, was hilariously clumsy. She offered to help wash the dishes and ended up splashing water everywhere, nearly shattering a chipped mug. Lily, watching the CEO struggle with basic domesticity, burst into genuine, unforced laughter. "Mommy, Amelia, you have to hold the cup tighter," she instructed, demonstrating with authority. Caleb watched the easy, innocent chaos. Seeing Amelia stripped of her power suit, awkwardly trying to fit into his simple life, something profound shifted within him. The knot in his chest released. He finally felt a sense of lightness. Their meetings became a routine, built around Lily's schedule. Amelia, who usually communicated through dictated emails, found herself texting Caleb about Lily's school concert times. She insisted on driving Lily to school a few times when Caleb had mandatory early morning duties, finding strange solace in the mundane, predictable rhythm of a normal life. Lily, in return, started bringing Amelia a new drawing almost every day, her innocent affection a constant, warm stream in Amelia's cold corporate world. Caleb, gently, patiently, began teaching Amelia basic life skills she had missed, like driving his old, stick-shift truck, a skill her luxury automatic car had never required. One quiet evening, sitting together on his worn sofa, Caleb hesitantly showed Amelia old videos on his phone, private, sacred moments of his grief. The footage showed Lily learning to walk again, unsteady and small, just weeks after her mother's death. Other clips showed Caleb, alone in the garage, openly weeping while struggling to fix a broken toy. Amelia watched, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. She didn't offer pity, only reverence. "That kind of strength isn't bought with money or titles, Caleb," she whispered, her voice husky. "You're the strongest person I know. You carried your pain and still showed up for Lily every day." The emotional intimacy built steadily, not with stolen kisses, but with shared truth. The "I love you" was unspoken, but their eyes said everything. The comfort, the recognition, the sheer relief of having found a safe harbor. The corporate world, however, continued to intrude. The board, still panicking over the stock volatility, issued an ultimatum. They demanded Amelia hold a high-profile press conference to publicly and emphatically affirm that she had no romantic attachment to her employee and that Caleb was merely a valued professional asset. Amelia stood firm, facing down her CFO. "I won't do it. I won't lie to protect your pride. You want me to choose the company's image over my honesty? I choose honesty." She realized that to keep Caleb and the genuine whole person she was becoming because of him, she had to risk losing the corporate world that had always defined her. She had to choose her own life. On a night blanketed by a heavy snowfall, the air charged with their unspoken affection, Caleb finally allowed himself to say the words that meant the most. "I've been afraid," he confessed, looking at the snow falling outside his window. "Afraid to let someone into the space where Sarah used to be, afraid of failing Lily again. But when I'm with you, Amelia, I stop being afraid. You feel like home." Amelia didn't need to ask what that meant. She simply rested her head on his shoulder, her hand tracing the lines of his weary jaw. "Then let me stay," she murmured. "Let me stay home, Caleb." The bond was sealed by Lily's approval. She presented Amelia with a delicate, colorful, braided friendship bracelet, the wooden centerpiece proudly carved with the word family. Amelia, who only wore custom diamond pieces, proudly wore the cheap, beautiful bracelet every day thereafter. 1 month later, Amelia held the highly anticipated launch event for the new AstraCorp product. The atmosphere was electric. Media was packed, lights were glaring, and the entire board was seated in the front row, watching her every move. Amelia walked out to the microphone, radiating confidence, her composure now genuine, not constructed. But before she started, she scanned the front seats, her eyes locking onto Caleb, who was seated discreetly with Lily, who was wearing a sparkly dress Amelia had bought her. Amelia began her speech, not with business metrics, but with a philosophy. "We talk about success in terms of profit and stock value," she stated, her voice clear and caring. "But I have learned a more profound definition. Success means nothing if you lose yourself on the way. The room hushed completely. She looked directly at Caleb. Someone taught me that, she continued. Someone who reminded me that truth is the only currency that matters. The audience began to buzz with confusion. Amelia pressed on, her conviction silencing the room. I am done hiding. I will no longer participate in the corporate lie that demands we deny our fundamental humanity. I won't hide the people who matter to me, the people who saved my life and my soul. She placed the microphone back, her contractually obligated speech abandoned. She descended the stairs of the stage, ignoring the gasps of the board and the shouts of the reporters. She walked directly, unequivocally, through the crowd, toward the driver and his daughter. Lily, seeing Amelia coming, broke free from Caleb's hand and ran, throwing herself into Amelia's arms. She didn't use her name. She used the new title she had given her. Mommy Amelia. The final layer of corporate pretense shattered. The auditorium erupted, a cacophony of camera shutters, shouts, and finally, a roar of collective emotional applause. Caleb watched the scene, his heart full. He saw his daughter's joy, and he saw the triumphant courage in Amelia's eyes. Amelia reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers, her corporate identity forever merged with her personal truth. They demanded I choose the company or my life, she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. If you'll have me, Caleb, I want to be part of your life. I want to build a life where I never have to apologize for loving you. Caleb brought their joined hands to his lips. You already are, he responded simply. They shared a long, beautiful embrace on the floor of the corporate auditorium, two worlds finally colliding and creating a space of undeniable, simple love. Months later, they are in the living room of a new airy apartment, a perfect compromise between his comfort and her space. They are decorating a Christmas tree. Amelia, laughing freely, lifts Lily high in her arms, helping her place the bright, glittering star on the very top branch. Caleb stands behind them, his arms wrapped securely around both of them, his hands resting on the two most important people in his life. He is no longer just a driver, and she is no longer just a CEO, voiceover. He drove her home once. She gave him a home forever. If this story of second chances, quiet strength, and unexpected love touched your heart, like and subscribe to Single Dad Stories, the home for viral, healing narratives that remind us what truly matters.